Up here, to me, the bathroom is a sort of an in-between, like a liminal space of public and private, because when you think of the bathroom, you think of like, okay, you're in an intense social situation and you're feeling anxious or upset, and where do you go? Probably the bathroom, right? And you're like in the stall and you have your 5 seconds, but there's also other people out there like talking, washing their hands, doing their hair. So it's kind of like a private space, but not so private. So to me, that's what makes it so rich and interesting to look at the graffiti that's happening there.
Yeah. So it's definitely in that, you described that kind of serendipitous moment when they just have that epiphany and they really want to put that message out there.
Yeah,
people to hear.
I like that serendipitous moment. That's a good way to put it, Morgan. Really good.
How much change, in your opinion, do you think could come from encouraging discussions such as these to be held in public settings where anonymity isn't an option?
Well, I think some of those conversations wouldn't be as possible the way that they were unfolding in those spaces. And so that's why I think it's cool to look at that. I do think that if, for example, you take up those kinds of themes and think, oh, I'm teaching on this campus and these women are interested in these things, I'm going to, and at that school I taught such a wide variety. I could teach a literature class, for example, and give them a bunch of works where those themes would come up, where we would be talking about them, so they'd have like a backdoor way of discussing them. But I think that mostly that raising those kinds of themes in classes in ways that imply to your students that they're no big deal and they're fine to talk about, that I think does make an impact on people without coming up with some kind of separate forum. So again, I guess going back to the contribution being pedagogical, even in certain classes here at JMU, the first year I was here 3 years ago, I was talking about that piece because I was in the process of writing it. And I know there were a couple people in the class that were in fact struggling with their sexuality, that as soon as I started talking, they perked up, they're paying attention. And I learned that later, right? And then I had the insight, oh, that's why they were sort of interested in me sort of saying this in this very nonchalant, this is no big thing kind of a way, because it's good. I think that depending on the background the student is coming from, and in the case of the students that I was working with, they were coming from backgrounds in some cases where they were socialized and raised to think of these things as very bad. And so to have a grown-up like up and acting like it's very everyday, it's no big thing, I think it does something.
Yeah, definitely. Helps them to cope with it, I'm sure.
I hope.
Can you tell us about the research that you are currently doing?
Yes, so with Jim Zimmerman, which some of you might have for class right now, we are looking at some data from a mixed method study that we did on students' perceptions of assignments across the curriculum that ask them to disclose aspects of their personal lives in the writing. So in other words, let's see, one of our research subjects was in social work, and had to write a lot of things about himself, reflecting on his past and how it would impact his future career as a social worker. But one of the things that he talked about was how it limited his classmates' understanding of who he was, because they began to see him as only the culmination of his worst moments, if that makes sense. So we're trying to figure out, again, it all connects back to with what I was talking about earlier, trying to look at what are really happening with our students aside from these sanctioned spaces where we think we know. But there's these generational divides, and there are limitations based on these genres like course evaluations. So it's totally anonymous research where I didn't know the vast majority of the students before. They are from other disciplines, or they've never had me. They just came, I asked them a set of questions. And so we're looking at that next to survey data, trying to see what are the topics that students tend to write about when they're trying to do writing for healing. And there are fascinating lists of things that people go to, but also their comfort level or not of being forced by virtue of an assignment to write about those things for school, and in some cases share it for peer review. So we've been working on that at the moment.
So do you think that their writing for school sometimes reflects maybe passions that they have otherwise, or problems that they're going through otherwise?
I think sometimes they do, and I think that there's a safe way for students to do that without opening themselves up to all kinds of vulnerability and all kinds of forms of ethos, like ways that they are now the person that experienced this something, and sometimes that limits the way that their classmates see them. So I think that there are some safer ways to do it without making students feel like they've got to disclose the super personal stuff to get a particular grade, if that makes sense. And so another thing that I research is stigma and how people who have gone through really stigmatizing experiences work to rebuild their credibility. So I suppose that interest in credibility bleeds into this other project.
Great. Sounds super interesting, and I'm sure
Thank you.
we're all looking forward to reading your next research.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for interviewing with us. And
Thanks for inviting me.
we had a great time.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That was really great.
Oh, thanks for the good
I
questions.
I want to